These tiny black squares are some of the richest gold ore on the planet. Most people throw them away, but inside this 500-gram pile of scrap is 24-karat gold wire. Today I'm going to test a brand new furnace and a refined process to see exactly how much gold we can pull from half a kilogram of RAM chips. First, we have to destroy the evidence. The gold is locked inside a tough epoxy resin. To get it out, we're going to need a lot of heat. I'm moving away from my old weed burner setup to this new propane melting furnace. It's cleaner, easier, and most importantly, no smoke, no smell. The goal here isn't to melt the metal yet. It's to turn the epoxy into brittle carbon, keeping the gas low so we don't end up with a puddle of slag. Once they're roasted, these chips will go from rock hard to paper brittle. Now that the chips are cool, I'm going to transfer them to something a little easier to work with. I'm going to grind these chips now down to a fine 80- mesh powder. This releases those tiny gold bond wires from the silicon dies and this carbon. If it's not fine enough, the gold stays trapped. To do the grinding, I'm using a grain grinder that's used in the home brewing and bakery industries. This makes quick work of the grinding process, getting it all done in just a couple of minutes. And those bond wires are small, so we want to make sure we get all of this leftover powder into the mix. There's our fine black powder. We're going to sift this now down to -80 mesh, which should then ensure that all of our bond wires have released from the dies. For the sifting itself, I'm using a vibrating flour sifter equipped with an 80 mesh screen. It makes quick work of the sifting between both the grinder and the sifter. It takes this task down to just a few minutes. This material that didn't go through the mesh, we're going to go ahead and regrind, repeat, sift until we have everything into our fine black gold dust. This last little bit, I'm just going to put aside and capture at a different time. And we'll want to be sure we get all the powder out of the bottom of the sifter and into the material we're going to work with. There it is. And here's where recycling electronics meets old school gold prospecting. I could process this whole pile with chemicals. It's messy, it's expensive, creates a ton of waste. Instead, I'm going to treat it like river sand. By panning the powder down, we concentrate the heavy gold and ditch the bulk of the waste. I'm going to start by getting everything wet, and then I'll just pan it down until I have about 10% of what I started with. This is a bit of a repetitive process, so I'm going to go ahead and go on time lapse to finish it up. Here's our concentrate from our 500 grams. This is stuff that contains the gold. I'm going to pour off some of the liquid here and begin to dry this. And then we're going to give it one more roast at 800 plus degrees Fahrenheit. This is going to burn off any remaining carbon. If you skip this step, the carbon will actually steal your gold during the chemical stages. To burn the carbon off, we need it spread evenly so it has access to oxygen. For this, I'm using a carbon steel paella pan and a high output propane burner. Again, I'm going to transfer the concentrate to a easier to work with dish, making sure I get all of it out of the pan. These are tiny little wires, so we don't want to leave any behind. So we started with 500 grams of material, and now we're down to just under 40 grams of high-grade concentrate. Get this into a beaker. It's time for a nitric leach. This will eat away the copper and other base metals, leaving behind our gold in the solids. After that, we'll move on to Aqua Regia. For the nitric leach, we need dilute nitric acid. So I'm going to go ahead and use distilled water. Make sure I rinse all of the concentrate into the beaker, which will also then give me the basis to add our nitric acid to. Adding approximately 50 milliliters of nitric acid. I'm going to cover this and let it do its thing. Once base metals are dissolved, we'll go ahead and filter and get ready for our Aqua Regia leach. We've captured the mud in the filter here. This is the gold bearing material, so we want to make sure we hang on to that. We're looking at our filtration, and I think we're ready to move forward. So we're going to get this out of the way and put this whole filter into the beaker. The Aqua Regia will dissolve the paper along with the gold. So carefully going to take it out, just dump it in here, set it up on the heat. We're going to add a little bit of hydrochloric acid to cover it, about 8 milliliters of nitric acid, and a splash of sulfuric. Probably more nitric acid I'm adding than I need, but I want to be sure I give every opportunity for the gold to contact the nitric and go into solution. Now, before we can drop the gold, I'm going to have to kill that excess nitric acid. So I'm going to use sulfamic acid while the solution is still hot. Once I get to no more bubbles, I know there's no more nitric, and then we can filter until this liquid is crystal clear. So the first pass filtration looks pretty good. Unfortunately, I saw a couple of the granules of that mud material made it through. So I'm going to go ahead and just run it through a new filter one time and make sure we get that out so we don't carry it into our pure gold. Alright, so there's a crystal clear solution. Time to drop some gold and see what we get. We add a precipitant, SMB. This TANUS test gives us a weird brown false positive, but don't panic. That's just chemistry of the chips. Now we'll wait for our gold to settle overnight. So here is our settled gold on the bottom. I'm going to go ahead and decant off the solution. And then we're going to do a couple of distilled water washes. There's not a ton of gold in here, so I'm going to go ahead and transfer again to an easier to work with smaller beaker before we go into the washes with distilled water. And while we're going, I'm going to put some distilled water up on the heat to do some boiling water washes at the end. They're going to add some hydrochloric acid to our gold. Going to put it out on the heat and let that boil for about 10 minutes. That's going to pull out any impurities that may have transferred to this point. Finally, we'll do some hot distilled water washes to clean the acid off of our gold before we set it up to dry. So there's our gold powder. We're going to dry it and melt it up. Okay, so there is our little gold bead. Get this quenched and see what we got. It's a nice little bead, not much, but it looks pretty good. So we have 3/4 of a gram of gold from 500 grams of scrap. If you were to scale that to ounces per ton, that is some of the richest pay dirt on earth. So a couple of thoughts. That new furnace made this one of the cleanest runs I've ever done. Concentrating that powder first did save me a fortune in acids and the amount of waste produced. Definitely going to go through my tail engine check for lysis, but for now, I'm looking forward to scaling up to larger batches and more gold. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe, and as always, comments, suggestions, your own experiences are absolutely welcome. Thank you.